November 18th, 2010, Dunwoody, Georgia. It's an ordinary Thursday morning at Dunwoody Prep Preschool. Cars pull into the lot one after another. Children run ahead of their parents toward the classroom doors. Teachers wait at the entrance, calling out names they know by heart. Among the parents that morning is 36-year-old Rusty Sneiderman, a husband, a father, a successful businessman on his way to another ordinary workday. He has just dropped off his young son. He has just said goodbye. And then the morning breaks apart. Gunshots tear through the quiet of the parking lot. Witnesses turn in time to see a masked man walk directly toward Rusty Sneiderman and open fire, in daylight, in public, in front of a preschool. Within seconds, the gunman is gone, swallowed by the streets of suburban Atlanta. To understand what happened to Rusty Sneiderman, you have to understand who he was before that morning. Rusty was born on June 18, 1974, in Cleveland, Ohio, to Marilyn and Donald Sneiderman, one of two sons. By every account, he grew up in a happy, tight-knit household, close with his older brother Steve, who would later go on to build his own career as a lawyer in Ohio. It was in college, while studying business at Indiana University in the early 1990s, that Rusty met a fellow student named Andrea Robin Greenberg. The two began dating, and after graduation, they married and relocated to Boston, where Rusty had been accepted into the MBA program at Harvard Business School. By the 2000s, career opportunities had pulled the young family south, to Atlanta, Georgia, where Andrea and Rusty built what looked, from the outside, like a stable and happy life. They welcomed two children, a daughter, Sophia, and a son, Ian. Professionally, Rusty was thriving. By 2010, he was in the middle of launching a new startup, Star Voicemail, and had built a reputation as a successful entrepreneur who served on the boards of several charities. He was, by every description available to investigators, a man with no known enemies. The Sneidermans settled into a life that looked, on paper, like the American ideal. Rusty was Harvard-educated, a father of two, and actively involved with several Atlanta-area medical charities. The family became active members of their community, philanthropists, synagogue members, the kind of people their neighbors described as a pillar of local life. Andrea, meanwhile, had built her own career, first doing project consulting work for Harvard's Business School, then, in March of 2010, taking a position as a quality manager at GE Energy in Cobb County. To friends, to family, to anyone looking in from the outside, the Sneidermans were simply a young couple raising their children and building their future. No one, not Rusty, not his parents, not his brother, could have imagined that an ordinary Thursday morning at his son's preschool would be the last time anyone saw him alive. Because Rusty Sneiderman was never just a name in a homicide file. He was a son, a brother, a husband, and a father whose two children would grow up only with photographs and other people's memories of him. To the people who worked alongside her, Andrea Sneiderman was exactly what she appeared to be: sharp, capable, a rising professional working as a quality manager at GE Energy in Cobb County. And at GE, Andrea reported to a man named Newman. Newman was, on paper, a model of corporate success. An engineer trained at Georgia Tech, he had spent roughly a decade with GE Energy, rising to manage a few thousand employees and a multi-million-dollar budget. He was married for 22 years, with 3 children. To his colleagues, he looked stable, successful, above suspicion. But by the time Andrea Sneiderman started working under him, Hemi Neumann's life away from the office was already coming apart. He was carrying significant debt, his marriage was under strain, and in October of 2010 he moved out of the home he shared with his wife. It was somewhere inside that unraveling that his relationship with Andrea began to change. What started as a professional connection grew, according to court testimony, into something far more entangled. Email records entered into evidence showed Neumann expressing his feelings for Andrea, while Andrea, in turn, shared hundreds of photographs of her children with him. Rusty Sneiderman did not appear in a single one. The two began traveling together for work. In August of 2010, they took a business trip to Greenville, South Carolina, where they booked adjoining rooms, drank wine, and watched a movie together on the same bed, dressed in pajamas, according to testimony later given in court. A waitress would later testify that she witnessed the two kissing on that same trip, what she described in court as a passionate, loving kiss, not a casual one. Days later, on August 29th, Newman sent Andrea an email asking her to marry him. More trips followed, to Scotland and back to South Carolina a second time. in the weeks before Rusty Sneiderman was killed. According to testimony, their emails also revealed Andrea describing tension at home, expressing dissatisfaction with how involved Rusty was in caring for their children. Andrea Sneiderman would maintain, then and for years afterward, that she never crossed a romantic line with her boss. She has repeatedly denied any affair with Hemi Newman. But at Neumann's own trial, something unusual happened. Both the prosecution and Neumann's own defense team agreed on one point: that Andrea Sneiderman and Hemi Newman had, in fact, been romantically involved. Two sides who agreed on almost nothing else in that courtroom agreed on that. And as Hemi Neumann's attachment to Andrea deepened, something else was building alongside it. A fixation that would, in the months ahead, turn from emotional dependence into a plan no one outside that relationship could see coming. While Rusty Sneiderman went on with the ordinary rhythms of family life, a second story, one he had no idea existed, was already taking shape behind a closed office door. By the autumn of 2010, Hemi Newman was a man under pressure from every direction. His finances were collapsing, his home was headed toward foreclosure, and the family was preparing to declare bankruptcy. His marriage was failing. His performance at work had just taken its first real hit. Months earlier, in February of 2010, the weight of it all had reportedly pushed him to the edge of suicide. And running through all of it was his fixation on Andrea Sneiderman. According to later court testimony, Newman's thinking had begun to take a disturbing turn. Newman would claim that around the time he and Rusty Sneiderman first met in August of 2010, an angel appeared to him and told him that Rusty Sneiderman had to die. To Newman, Rusty was no longer simply Andrea's husband. He was the one thing standing between Newman and the life he believed he was meant to have. By October, belief was turning into preparation. Newman moved out of the home he shared with his wife and 3 children on October 3rd. Over the following weeks, he began shopping for a handgun, attended a gun safety course, and practiced shooting at a firing range. Then came a warning sign that almost ended everything before it began. On the morning of November 10, 2010, 8 days before the murder, Rusty Sneiderman smelled gas at his home and stepped outside to check for a leak. That's when he found a man hiding in his backyard. The man appeared to be carrying a gun and fled as soon as Rusty noticed him. Rusty called 911. That man was Hemi Newman, in disguise. He would later admit he had planned to shoot Rusty that very day, but fled once he realized he'd been spotted. What investigators would later find striking was what happened around that same hour. Phone records showed Andrea called Hemi Newman twice in the hour before Rusty's 911 call, and once again roughly 30 minutes afterward. A warning had come and gone. Rusty Sneiderman had looked his future killer in the eye in his own backyard and had no idea what he was looking at. 1 week later, Hemi Newman would not fail a second time. Behind the scenes, the final pieces were already falling into place. A rented vehicle, a route, a routine he'd been watching for weeks. The plan that had started as a fixation, a fantasy, an obsession spiraling quietly out of view, was now a matter of when, not if. The stage was set for a Thursday morning that would change the Sneiderman family forever. November 18, 2010, a Thursday morning like any other. Rusty Sneiderman wakes, gets his children ready, and drives toward Dunwoody Prep Preschool. The same school run, the same routine he and Andrea had followed countless mornings before. He has no idea that, somewhere nearby, Hemi Newman is already in position. In the weeks leading up to this moment, Newman had rented a van, studied the school's routine, and armed himself. Now, that preparation was about to be put into motion. Around 9:15 that morning, in a busy parking lot outside the preschool, with children playing on a playground less than 30 feet away, Rusty Sneiderman was shot 4 times. The gunfire came just minutes after he had dropped his 2-year-old son off inside. There was no warning, no words exchanged. According to a former Dunwoody detective, the gunman walked up to Rusty and, without saying a word, simply began shooting. Witnesses described a bearded man in a dark hoodie walking away from Rusty's body and fleeing the scene in a silver minivan. One caller's voice, frantic, would later become part of the official record. "Somebody's been shot and killed out in front of Dunwoody Prep. This guy is bleeding to death out here," the witness told the 911 dispatcher. A medical examiner would later determine Rusty had been shot 3 times in the torso, and once with the muzzle of the gun pressed directly against his jaw. He was rushed to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Around him, the ordinary morning had turned into chaos. Parents grabbing their children, teachers pulling kids back from windows, a school built for goodbyes and finger paintings, now surrounded by police tape and flashing lights. Within hours, one fact was already clear to Dunwoody investigators, even before they had a single suspect. This was an execution-style killing, deliberate, targeted, and carried out by someone who knew exactly who he was looking for. This was not a robbery. It was not random. Someone had come to that parking lot that morning with one purpose: to kill Rusty Sneiderman. And as the investigation began, no one yet understood how close to home the answer would turn out to be. As police worked to secure the parking lot, the news of what had happened was already spreading through Dunwoody. Andrea Sneiderman received the call no spouse ever wants to receive. Within the hour, family and friends began arriving, first at the hospital, then at the Sneiderman home, trying to absorb something that, for an affluent, quiet Atlanta suburb, felt almost impossible to process. A father, gunned down steps from a preschool, in broad daylight, with children nearby. The entire affluent community of Dunwoody was left baffled, a place where, as one detective would later put it, this kind of violence simply didn't happen. Parents who had dropped their own children off that same morning now found themselves facing a different question. Was their school safe? Was this random? Or could it happen again? 2 days into the investigation, with no suspect and no clear motive, Rusty's family offered a $10,000 reward, hoping it would help generate leads. At that stage, detectives had almost nothing to go on. No obvious enemy, no clear motive, just a community demanding answers it didn't yet have. Local news crews descended on Dunwoody Prep within hours. The story spread beyond Georgia almost overnight. A senseless, public murder outside a daycare, with a victim who by every account had no enemies at all. The question on every newscast was the same one investigators were now racing to answer. Who would want Rusty Sneiderman dead, and why? The search for that answer was about to lead detectives somewhere none of them expected. With no eyewitness able to identify the shooter, detectives turned to the evidence the crime scene itself had left behind. Officials were soon able to review surveillance footage from the preschool's parking lot, which confirmed the attack was deliberate. The shooter moved with clear purpose and determination. That same footage led investigators directly to the rental company that had supplied the silver minivan seen fleeing the scene. Records showed the van had been rented the day before the murder and returned just hours after it was committed, prompting investigators to process the vehicle for fingerprints and DNA. Inside, they recovered fibers consistent with a fake beard, matching witness descriptions of the gunman. The rental records pointed to one name: 48-year-old Newman, Andrea Sneiderman's boss at GE Energy. It was a connection no one investigating the case had anticipated. GE Energy confirmed that Newman and Andrea Sneiderman worked out of the same office complex off Powers Ferry Road, and detectives now had to ask why a senior executive with no apparent connection to Rusty Sneiderman would be tied to a rented getaway vehicle. When detectives first spoke with Andrea, her answers seemed straightforward. Asked whether Rusty had been having an affair, she described him as a model husband, insisting nothing like that was happening. When asked about her own relationships outside the marriage, she told investigators that her boss, Newman, had made a pass at her, but that she had quickly shut it down. It was a detail that, at the time, seemed almost incidental. It would not stay that way. Investigators tracked Newman's phone activity and learned he had purchased a .40 caliber handgun on October 31st. The seller was able to provide a shell casing, and ballistics testing confirmed it matched the weapon used to kill Rusty Sneiderman. When Newman was brought in for questioning, he claimed to have been at work the entire day of the murder. He admitted he was attracted to Andrea and wanted to pursue a relationship with her, but when investigators directly asked if he had killed Rusty Sneiderman, he gave no answer at all. He never denied it. For detectives, that silence was its own kind of confirmation. Surveillance footage from GE's own building showed Newman leaving work and driving off in the silver minivan on the day of the shooting. The case against him was building fast, but it raised a far more uncomfortable question that investigators couldn't yet answer. Did Andrea Sneiderman know what Newman was planning? In January of 2011, Newman was arrested in connection with Rusty Sneiderman's murder. The following month, he was indicted for malice murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. His defense team didn't deny that he pulled the trigger. Months before his trial began in February of 2012, Newman changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity, putting the entire case in the hands of psychiatrists arguing over whether he understood right from wrong at the moment he fired. Prosecutors were unconvinced, with the district attorney telling jurors plainly that Newman killed Rusty Sneiderman because he wanted his wife, his money, and his life. A jury ultimately found Newman guilty but mentally ill, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Years later, that conviction would be overturned by the Georgia Supreme Court over a legal error involving privileged psychiatric records, forcing a retrial, one that, in 2016, ended the same way it had before, guilty. But long before that retrial, the investigation had already turned in a direction few had expected. That same January, when Newman's arrest became public, the Sneiderman family says they received a phone call from Andrea, one in which she apologized, leaving them with the sense she knew more than she had told them. Rusty's father would later say it confirmed something he'd already begun to suspect. From there, scrutiny of Andrea Sneiderman only intensified. She would eventually face 16 counts, including felony murder, in connection with her husband's killing, with prosecutors alleging a forbidden romance that ended in murder, silence despite suspicion, and lies told to conceal the truth from her family, her friends, the police, and a jury. Andrea pleaded not guilty to every charge against her. Eventually, prosecutors asked the court to dismiss the 3 most serious counts, including murder, after new evidence prompted them to re-interview witnesses. The murder charge was formally dropped in July of 2013, leaving Andrea to stand trial only on the remaining counts: 7 charges of perjury, 4 of making false statements, and 1 each of hindering the apprehension of a criminal and concealing a material fact. The case had narrowed, but the questions hadn't disappeared. Was Andrea Sneiderman simply a woman who had made the mistake of hiding an inappropriate relationship from the people closest to her, including, eventually, a jury? Or had she known, on some level, exactly what Newman was capable of, and said nothing? It was a question that would soon be put before 12 jurors, and the answer they reached would only deepen the controversy, not end it. When Newman's trial began in February of 2012, prosecutors argued there was nothing confused or delusional about what he had done, that he had built a plan, a motive, and carried it out with full awareness of right and wrong. His own defense team didn't dispute that he pulled the trigger. They argued instead that mental illness had left him unable to understand that what he was doing was wrong. The jury didn't fully accept either side. They found Newman guilty, but mentally ill, of malice murder and the related firearm charge. He was sentenced to life in prison, with no chance of parole. That should have closed the book on Rusty Sneiderman's murder. Instead, it opened a second trial. In August of 2013, Andrea Sneiderman faced a jury of her own, not for murder, since those charges had already been dropped weeks earlier, but for what prosecutors said she had done in the aftermath: lying. She was convicted on 9 of the 13 felony counts against her: perjury and hindering the apprehension of a killer. Judge Gregory Adams sentenced her to 5 years on each count, to run concurrently. She served just under 2 years before being granted parole in June of 2014, with her parole period ending in 2017. What the verdicts never resolved, what no jury was ever asked to decide with full certainty, was the question that had defined the case from the beginning: how much did Andrea Sneiderman actually know before her husband was killed? She was never convicted of any role in planning or causing Rusty's death. The murder belonged, in the eyes of the law, to one man alone: Newman. But for the family Rusty Sneiderman left behind, a verdict was never going to be the same thing as an answer. In December of 2013, Rusty's parents and brother filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Andrea, which was later settled privately. One final, quiet acknowledgement that for them, the case was never really about the criminal courts at all. It was about a father who never came home, and 2 children left to grow up without him. The murder of Rusty Sneiderman was never the story of a single, impulsive act. It was the end point of months of hidden communication, a relationship concealed from nearly everyone who knew either party, and one man's fixation that grew, unchecked, until it became lethal. More than a decade later, the people who knew Rusty best still measure his absence in the ordinary moments he never got to have. His father, Donald, now living in Ohio, continues to mark his son's birthday and holidays, like Father's Day, by remembering him, holding on to the memory of his smile, even as the years make it harder to picture clearly. Rusty's brother Steve went on to build his own law practice in Cleveland, where he and his wife now help other families navigate legal struggles of their own. Andrea Sneiderman, for her part, has since reclaimed her maiden name and now lives a quiet life in Alpharetta, Georgia, working as a private tutor. Rusty's 2 children, meanwhile, grew up largely outside the public eye, raised for a time by Andrea's parents, their lives shaped by a loss neither of them chose, and a legal battle that played out over their heads. What remains, beneath all the headlines and courtroom arguments, is simpler than any verdict: a father who left for a school drop-off one Thursday morning and never came home. Rusty Sneiderman is remembered by the people who loved him, not for the manner of his death, but for the life that came before it. A husband, a father, a son, a friend whose future was taken from him in a parking lot he had no reason to fear. If there is a lasting lesson, in the case of Andrea and Rusty Sneiderman, it may be this: obsession rarely announces itself. It builds quietly, behind closed doors and ordinary routines, until the people closest to it are the last to see where it's heading, and by then, it's often too late to stop.